Hello, and welcome to tonight's PETA Town Hall meeting. This evening we'll be joined by PETA President Ingrid Newkirk and Senior Vice President Guillermo for our first ever Town Hall devoted to the work of PETA and our affiliates to improve the lives of horses. I'm Ben Williamson, PETA's Senior International Media Director, and I will be co-hosting this evening's discussion. For those of you on the phone, at any time during tonight's conversation, you can press 0 to ask a question. Once you do, you'll be transferred to a PETA staff member who will record your question and put you back into the town hall. If you have access to a computer, you can also join us for this evening's conversation at PETA.org/August Town Hall. Once logged in, you can type in your questions and listen to the discussion without using your phone. We're really expecting a high volume of questions from our supporters this evening, and while we may not get to everyone on tonight's call, we will be sure to follow up with you in the coming days if we don't. So, for those of you who are just joining us now, very welcome. I'm Ben Williamson. I am PETA's Senior International Media Director, and I'll be co-hosting tonight. Ingrid and Kathy are going to be on the line shortly to kick off this evening's special town hall discussion of our work for horses. If you're on the phone and find yourself inspired by tonight's conversation, please do consider pressing 7 at any time during the call to make a gift. If you're joining us online, you can also donate at PETA.org/horses and take action on the many important PETA campaigns we'll be reviewing this evening. We'll be discussing a wide range of groundbreaking work for horses tonight, so I do hope you'll stay on the line for the entire town hall. Guillermo will be giving you an exclusive look at how PETA is changing the horse racing industry. Ingrid will share details on how PETA and our international affiliates are getting horse-drawn carriages off crowded city streets. And we'll introduce you to a few of the many horses we've been able to rescue thanks to your generous support. I'm sure that many of you are excited to learn about this vital work, so let's get started. Ingrid, on to you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to everybody for joining us, those of you who are far-flung long-timers, and everyone who's joining us this evening for the very first time. Welcome to everybody. This, as you know, is our fourth Town Hall of 2016. And before we begin our meeting, I will tell you of a current operation that's underway right now, as we already have an advanced question about that. On many of your minds, I think you know what's happening in Louisiana, that awful flooding in Baton Rouge that crept up on them suddenly, and in other parts of southern Louisiana too. Like me, you might have seen that video of the man rescuing the woman from a sunken car that was drifting away, and you hear the woman, once she's pulled up and her head is above water, pleading for them to get her dog. Her dog was still in the car. And then, joy of joys, they do manage to pull the dog out of the car. And the dog looks exactly like a little dog I rescued 3 Christmases ago. But this is in such stark contrast to what we faced during Hurricane Katrina, when thousands of people were pulled from their homes, some at gunpoint, and were told they couldn't take their dogs, their cats, their parrots, their hamsters. No animals were allowed to leave, and terrible things happened. So I think this is an enormous show of how much influence we've been able to exert, all the humane groups, to say that must never happen again. We have sent 2 trucks down to Louisiana. We have experienced workers on them, and they are going to help animal protection authorities. The shelters are overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of animals who have come in. In the very first operation, over 1,000 human beings and over 100 animals were evacuated. We know, very sad things, we know that the dogs on chains probably drowned, same way they did during Katrina, if there was no one there to help them, and the rabbits in the backyard hutches too. But we're down there, our people are there. Please visit our Facebook page and our blog and share with everybody you know how we're making a difference for dogs, cats, and other animals who need our help right now there, and of course everywhere where we usually work. You can support, and I've been asked this question, what can you do? You can support our vital emergency rescue work like the work we're doing in Louisiana today by giving specifically to our Animal Emergency Fund. The Animal Emergency Fund is at PETA.org/AEF. So tonight I'm speaking to you from Washington, and while the news may be filled with the debates on who the next person living in the White House might be, tonight we're going to skip the politics. You may be happy to hear and focus on a topic that has a special place in the hearts of our supporters, and that's PETA's groundbreaking work for horses. I am sure everyone on the call knows our motto, that animals are not ours to eat, to wear, to experiment on, to use for entertainment, or to abuse in any way. And as you'll hear this evening, PETA's working very hard to assure that that motto is equally applied to horses who face all manner of exploitation. This evening, we'll talk about some tremendous progress in our work to keep thoroughbreds from collapsing and dying on the track. You know that the illegal use of drugs by the horse racing industry is rampant, and we are dealing with that, and we're also getting horses off busy city streets where they're forced to pull heavy carriages laden with tourists through dangerous traffic, dangerous for them. We'll also discuss our work to stop the harrowing journey of more than 100,000 American horses this year alone who will be strung up by one leg, have their throats slit, sometimes while they're still conscious, in slaughterhouses in Canada and in Mexico. And we'll talk about how our cruelty investigations and emergency response teams are helping rescue many horses in North America who are found abused and neglected in farms and fields.
And just while we're on the topic of rescues, I'm sure that many of you have heard of and indeed hopefully supported PETA's Angels for Animals program. The generous donors to this program have helped us provide more than 6,500 sturdy dog houses to neglected so-called outside dogs, giving them some desperately needed relief from scorching heat waves like the one many of us are experiencing right now. And often the busiest season for this program begins as temperatures start to dip below freezing. That's when our field workers and volunteers hit the icy streets to bring dog houses and warm straw bedding that help lonely dogs survive the winter. Now, while one of our field workers was delivering straw in rural North Carolina on a frigid day last February, she spotted a little black and white horse named Sebastian. She found him all alone in a decrepit, muddy pen that was littered with broken boards and indeed his own waste, languishing for goodness knows how long without adequate food, water, or shelter to protect him from the elements. In addition to these conditions, Sebastian's face was horribly swollen from a severe disfiguring injury that had long gone untreated. And knowing that he was unable to care for this sweet disabled horse, his owner agreed to give Sebastian to our rescue team so that he could have a chance at a better life. Well, we brought Sebastian to a local farm run by a longtime PETA member. A veterinarian who examined poor Sebastian told us that in addition to suffering from a severe eye infection that had gone untreated for some time, Sebastian was partially paralyzed in his face and one hind leg due to a severe blunt force injury sustained years earlier. While the damage from that injury was permanent, it didn't cause him any pain. We put Sebastian on a treatment for his eye condition, and his condition quickly showed marked improvement. And when Sebastian was well enough to travel, we loaded him onto a truck and transported him from Virginia to his new forever home in New Mexico. And almost as soon as he walked out of that truck, Sebastian began celebrating by gleefully kicking up his heels and rolling around in the dirt. And though he may be a little limp and dribble when he eats and drinks due to his injury, Sebastian is utterly adored by all who meet him, including the goats and other rescued animals who he'll be spending the rest of his days with.
If you haven't watched the absolutely wonderful, very, very brief video of Sebastian setting off for his new home and arriving in his new home, I hope you'll visit PETA.org/horses and just take a few minutes to watch that and share it with everybody you know. you will see how much this scrappy little horse's life has changed since we first met him. Before we bring Kathy on the phone to discuss our game-changing work to reform the horse racing industry, I'd like to just mention another horse who we rescued under very different circumstances. Valediction was his name. We've changed it now, but Valediction is a direct descendant of Seattle Slew. That's a thoroughbred who may best be known for winning horse racing's Triple Crown back in 1977. So while he may have come from what the industry considers royalty, the way Valediction was treated by them was anything but regal. It was a total disgrace. We had a PETA investigator who first met Valediction in a stable at Churchill Downs, the racetrack, and they found that his knees were being repeatedly injected with cortisone, and his forelegs were covered with dozens of little white scars, which indicate that he'd been subjected to what they call freeze firing. This is an excruciatingly painful procedure. What they do is they burn horses with liquid nitrogen in the hope that it will stimulate blood flow to an injury. It's not for the horse's sake, it's just to make the horse keep running. There's very little evidence that freeze-firing works, but both the scars and the injections that our investigators saw were absolute telltale signs that he was suffering from chronic injuries, all from racing. So despite his leg problems, Valediction was made to run in what they call a claiming race, and this is where thoroughbreds are bought or claimed by their new owners. Somebody comes forward and pops some money on the table and they go to some other racer. Valediction suffered a bone fracture while he was on that track that day that left him in so much pain that he had to be transported by horse ambulance to a veterinary clinic. And when his trainer heard that he'd been claimed, he joked that Valediction was a rat. That's industry slang for a horse who doesn't make money anymore. And the owner said he was glad to get rid of him. Valediction, soon after that, underwent surgery to repair the injuries to his leg. We had that done. Probably so that, that's not ours, sorry, so that his new owner, whoever it was who claimed him, could try to recoup his costs by attempting to race him yet again. And we were sure that at that race, that last race, he would likely have been caused a catastrophic breakdown on the track, and then he would have been sent straight to the slaughterhouse. And when I say straight to the slaughterhouse, obviously that means we can't slaughter horses in the U.S., so we send them, the race people send them to Mexico or to Canada. Thankfully, that's when our hero, Simpsons co-creator and dear friend to animals, the late Sam Simon, saw footage from our investigation. We sat on the couch. I said, "Look, Sam, this is what's happening." And Sam said, "Let's get him." So today we have him. A Valediction roams through the fields of a beautiful farm in Virginia where he will never be forced to run for his life again. As I say, he's been renamed, and he's happy as a clam. We will introduce you to other wonderful rescues like Valedictions, including another horse we rescued just last week as a result of that same PETA investigation into horse racing drug abuse. But first, just a quick reminder, you can press 0 at any time during this call and ask a question about our work, and we will get back to everyone. And you can press 7 if you would please like to make a donation that helps more stories like this be possible for horses and other animals. Ben.
Thank you, Ingrid. And joining us now is PETA Senior Vice President Kathy Guillermo. Some of you may remember Kathy from previous town hall meetings where she's discussed how we've helped cut off the supply of primates to U.S. laboratories and recent challenges to PETA's vital investigative work. Kathy has been helping PETA win victories for animals for more than 27 years. But well before that time, she was an avid equestrian, even participating in show jumping events and attending horse races at tracks in the Midwest and throughout California. Today, she's one of that industry's most outspoken critics, spearheading PETA's work to save horses and bring about significant reforms that impact the entire racing industry. Tonight, Kathy will be sharing the latest updates on her work for horses and the tremendous progress we've seen in the years since the breakdown of 8 bells during 2008's Kentucky Derby. Kathy.
Thanks, Ben, for that warm welcome. Ben just mentioned the death of 8 bells. This was the young filly whose front ankles broke just after crossing the finish line in the Kentucky Derby in 2008. And for many PETA supporters, seeing her euthanized on the track 8 years ago was a sobering introduction to this dirty business of horse racing. This is an industry responsible for an average of 24 fatal breakdowns by horses every week. It operates with no federal oversight and 38 different sets of regulations, one for each state where horse racing is legal. Now, our protest of 8 Bells' death triggered some massive new reforms within the horse racing industry. Just to start, the cruel pointed whip, like the one that was used to beat 8 Bells in her final race, was replaced nationwide with a wide-ended whip that doesn't hurt quite as much. This reform went still further last year after we filed a complaint and protested the 32 times the Triple Crown winner American Pharoah was whipped during the Kentucky Derby. Following this, the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission enacted the strictest regulation in the country governing the use of whips. And we saw other reforms too. Top Tracks placed cameras in the barns to catch those who were using illegal drugs. They made horse ambulances on the track mandatory. They increased pre-race veterinary checks, and they increased drug testing. New York State chose to be transparent about breakdowns, and they began sharing publicly what horses died and why. This isn't enough, but it's a really good first step. And New York now also posts the medication records of all horses before major races. Now, this progress makes horse racing less cruel, and it's a step in the right direction, but of course, it's really certainly not enough. According to the industry's own reports, we know that 90% of horses who die from fatal breakdowns, as 8 Bells did, suffered from a prior injury. Just the day before the Kentucky Derby, 8 Bells was injected with phenylbutazone, a powerful anti-inflammatory drug, and this is commonly referred to as bute in the industry, and it's used to prevent swelling. But if horses have swelling and soreness, why are they running in the first place? That drug can also keep horses from displaying signs of their injuries. This past May, 2 more horses, Homeboy Chris and Promedja, died during a different race of the Triple Crown, the Preakness Stakes in Baltimore. And a necropsy of Homeboy Chris showed that while there was no known cause for the heart attack that killed him, he had an astounding 6 times the allowable amount of a strong anti-inflammatory drug in his system. Now, in most sports, of course, the abuse of medication to mask pain and to enhance performance is really taken seriously, and it warrants the stripping of awards and even lifetime bans for some athletes. But that's not the case in horse racing, an industry where, as our groundbreaking investigation has shown, the use of sedatives, painkillers, and anti-inflammatory drugs has become a deadly part of its own culture. In 2014, you may remember this, PETA shook up the racing world with the release of a powerful investigation of top trainer Steve Asmussen. In it, we exposed an industry that often keeps horses chronically medicated. Now, that investigation documented, among other abuses, the near-daily administration of sedatives, muscle relaxants, anti-inflammatory drugs, and other medications that keep sore and injured horses running instead of giving them a chance to heal and recuperate. And it also revealed the daily use of a powerful thyroid hormone that was tossed into horses' food every afternoon just like it was a supplement. Horses were fed this hormone without any diagnosis of thyroid disease or even regular monitoring of the hormone levels of their blood. The release of our investigation has been called a game changer by horse racing media, and in a minute we'll discuss some of the ways PETA is making that change happen. But first I'd like to bring back Ingrid to give you details on some more of PETA's landmark investigative work for horses.
Thanks, Kathy. Every year breeders churn out nearly 25,000 thoroughbred foals, all for the horse racing industry. So it's important to note this is down dramatically from 50,000 that were bred when our work began to help horses on the track. We had an investigation at Darley, which is a top breeding stable in Kentucky, and the investigation revealed that many of them, these foals, are bred in a regimen not all that different from what you'd see on a factory farm assembly line. What they do is they bring in a single prized stallion, and he is expected to cover, as they call it, breed, with as many as 100 mares in just a year. It's so totally unnatural. Breeders charge tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars for a stallion to sire one foal, a single foal. But the price paid by the owners pales in comparison to what's paid by the roughly 1,200 thoroughbreds who will suffer fatal breakdowns on the track before 2016 is over. It also pales in comparison with the estimated 10,000 thoroughbreds whose lives will end when their throats are slit in Canada and Mexico, in those slaughterhouses there. Now, for many of these foals, and there's nothing dearer than a little horse foal, their very first taste of the racing industry comes when they're forced to recklessly run in undertax shows, what we call suicide shows, and even jockeys call them suicide shows. What they have to do there is impress prospective buyers who have come to buy them at auction. So in 2011, as far back as then, we had a PETA investigation which went down and documented how these underdeveloped horses, they're just babies, are often whipped into sprinting at speeds faster than they'll ever race again in their lifetimes. And sometimes, of course, that results in catastrophic breakdowns on the track, like the ones Kathy just described. That investigation in 2011 resulted in one major thoroughbred auction company eliminating these deadly timed sprints for juvenile horses. But this practice still continues at other auctions, and Kathy will tell you more.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that most of the owners and trainers in the racing industry really have little more than a short-term financial interest in the horses that they work with. And without either federal oversight or direct accountability for a thoroughbred's lifetime, these beautiful animals can suffer terribly. And earlier tonight, Ingrid told you the story of Valediction, a horse from our Asmussen investigation who had to be driven from the barn after suffering a leg fracture during a claiming race. These races allow for horses to be purchased and taken away by a new owner immediately after they're over, allowing trainers and owners to dump unwanted horses easily. And of course, this means no one is committed to that horse. We've documented more than 2,000 horses callously sold through these races in just a single 2-month period. And it's not unheard of for a horse to be claimed by owners as many as 12 times or more during their racing career. And remember, a racing career for a thoroughbred is usually only 5 to 7 years long. And as I said, because no one individual is committed to a horse throughout his or her lifetime, every day can bring new uncertainty for these animals and less incentive for owners to care for them when their racing days are over and they're no longer considered profitable. The lack of adequate retirement provisions as well as excessive breeding is really lethal to horses. And for many PETA supporters, this issue first came to light with a groundbreaking 2009 PETA investigation that tracked hundreds of U.S. thoroughbreds who were sold to stables in Japan, where 90% of all horses end up in slaughterhouses. During that investigation, we discovered 2002 Kentucky Derby and Preakness winner War Emblem at a Japanese breeding farm where he was no longer making any money as a stud, and this put his life in imminent danger because there's no retirement there. Just months after we released our investigation, though, I'm happy to say that as a result of pressure from that case, War Emblem was brought back to the United States, where he was allowed to retire in peace. Later, PETA investigators followed a trailer from a meat buyer's property in Iowa to a slaughterhouse in Quebec. During that harrowing 36-hour, 1,100-mile trip, They witnessed how the 33 horses on the transporter endured sub-freezing conditions without any food or water or even a chance to stop and rest for a few minutes. At least 40% of the horses who were taken to that slaughterhouse were found to be still conscious after receiving a captive bolt shot to the head. Before that journey, though, our investigators discovered a horse called Royale with Speed by the people who bred him, the grandson of Triple Crown winner Secretariat. He was in a crowded kill pen at a livestock auction house where he had been sold to a meat buyer for just $350. And PETA was able to save Royale from right off that truck. He's now renamed Gray Man, and he will spend the rest of his days enjoying his retirement with other rescued animals, including another thoroughbred we rescued from the same auction house, coming home. But this year, thousands of other horses, including some thoroughbreds like these two, just won't be that lucky. You can help us change this by visiting PETA.org/horses tonight and voicing your support for a bill that would prevent horse slaughter in the U.S. and this is so important, and the transport of American horses to foreign slaughterhouses, effectively ending the slaughter of American horses for food, both here and abroad.
Thanks, Kathy. I just wanted to mention, you said you were talking about Royale with Speed. I don't know if anybody saw that film. What was the name of that film where it was Royale with Cheese that they were talking about? Kathy, do you remember the name of that film?
Pulp Fiction, I believe you're talking about.
Yep, that's right, Pulp Fiction. That's it.
So I thought it just stuck in my craw that they had the goal to call this poor horse Royale with Speed, like the McDonald's Royale with Cheese, because that's where he was going. He was going to end up as hamburger meat before we rescued him. By the way, if anyone has any questions, please press 0 anytime during the call. We'll get to you. Kathy, one thing you didn't mention, which is another great sign of progress, is you have been able to help secure funds from racing officials who just a decade ago wouldn't have thought for a second about working with PETA. And while we continue to work to stop any horse from being slaughtered for their flesh, you have compelled the racing industry to now finally start to give horses a second chance at retirement, putting up funds for that within their own industry, rather than leaving them to die with a butcher's knife across their throats. Going back to 2011, that important investigation, and we've had so many, PETA did put together a proposal for the first ever racing industry-funded retirement program, because who else should pay for the retirement of the horses they use other than that wretched industry? So following discussions with the Jockey Club, and the Jockey Club registers all newborn foals born every year, the racing industry embraced our plan, and they have worked now with owners, trainers, track owners, jockeys, auction owners, and others to create what they're calling the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. And this is so, so important. This milestone marks the very first time that the racing industry as a whole has ever taken responsibility for the horses it discards. The Jockey Club changed its bylaw for the first time in more than 100 years. And what it does, doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. It now charges an extra $25 per foal born to go into a retirement fund for them. And Alliance employees are now working with trainers to ensure that horses are retired. Long way to go, but this is a fabulous, fabulous start. They're also at the terrible auctions. They go there to whisk away as many of the thoroughbreds who end up there as they can.
Thanks, Ingrid. But just before Kathy joins us again to share our recent progress in reforming the horse racing industry, I'd just like to really stress that you can all press 0 at any time during tonight's town hall to ask a question about any aspect of our work for horses and indeed other animals. So that's 0 to ask a question.
Thanks, Ben. And just to give you some idea of how earth-shaking our investigation of trainer Steve Asmussen has been to the horse racing industry, since the New York Times first broke our investigation, they've followed up with a record 14 more articles on the rampant drug use and deceptive practices that we helped uncover. as I mentioned earlier, there are no federal laws regulating the horse racing industry, but there is one bill that has been introduced by Representative Pitt of Pennsylvania that would bring badly needed drug oversight. If you want to know more about that, you can go to PETA.org/horses, and you can take part in our action alert on this very important bill if you haven't done that already. The good news for some horses is that since most of what we uncovered occurred in New York, it fell to the New York State Gaming Commission to take action on our findings. They released a scathing report that acknowledged and criticized, quote, the entrenched drug culture in racing. The commission confirmed the unnecessary use of thyroid hormones, and they fined Asmussen $10,000 for administering them illegally to at least 45 horses within 2 days of a race. But more importantly, they introduced new rules that will soon mandate several things. First, that no drug be given to a horse except as an actual medical therapy, which would seem evident to logical people, but they've discovered it now. The tightening of controls on metabolism-modifying drugs, a ban on the unnecessary use of any substance, and a rule that trainers have to keep a log of all dispensed medicines administered at the stable. And now PETA will work to get similar rules adopted in the other states where horse races occur. Our investigation also helped to bring some new pressure on to stop the use of another problem in racing, the illegal electrical shock devices that are called buzzers or machines in the racing parlance. And these are used to deliver a strong electric shock to horses in order to get them to run faster. In 2014, Churchill Downs, home of the Kentucky Derby, did announce that it would be taking new measures to keep them from being used on the track. And just last year, veteran jockey Roman Chapa, who during our investigation was said to have once hidden a buzzer in his mouth to avoid race officials in New Mexico, was discovered to have been using a buzzer during a race. And in an unprecedented move, he was indicted by law enforcement for race fixing, and he now awaits trial. He's also off the track since he was fined $100,000 and suspended from racing for 5 years by the Texas Racing Commission. And these are actions and fines and suspensions that just never occurred at this level before. Because of this case, Steve Asmussen is still being sued by the U.S. Department of Labor, in addition to the fine by the Racing Commission in New York, and he remains under investigation by immigration officials and possibly the IRS. But perhaps most importantly, this has also led to discussions between PETA and racing organizations and track owners on improving the lives of horses.
Thank you, Kathy. And in case you missed it, that web address that Kathy mentioned, PETA.org/horses. It includes links to take action for horses on many of the issues we've discussed this evening, the great video of Sebastian that we mentioned at the start of our conversation, and an option to make a gift in support of PETA's work for horses and all animals. And now Ingrid would like to share a bit more about how PETA is saving horses from being abused in another form of cruel and frivolous entertainment. Ingrid.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, I do want to say one thing. Many of you may not know that Kathy had a major role in the cancellation of that HBO show Luck. That was that high-profile series about the horse racing industry produced by Dustin Hoffman and Michael Mann. The film, or the show, was actually filmed at the Santa Anita racetrack in California, and former race horses were used, so-called retired race horses, and 3 of them, in terrible shape, died during the filming of that show. If it hadn't been for Kathy's determination, the same determination that's so drastically helping to reform the horse racing industry now, there almost certainly would have been more who died. So, Kathy, I'm going to put you on the spot to give us more information about Luck, that awful show, and why it was canceled.
Thanks, Ingrid. I first heard about problems on the set of Luck when I began getting whistleblower calls, and I mean a lot of them, from more than a dozen people who worked at the track or on the set, or some who had been fired by the American Humane Association because they had tried to protect the horses. And they all said the same thing. Retired thoroughbreds who aren't physically fit, were being put through the starting gate again and again. This is something no racehorse can endure. to give all they have in one race. And you have to remember that these horses didn't know they were just being used to film a TV show, and then to be brought back and told to race again. By the time the whistleblowers began calling me, 2 horses had already died from breaking down on the track. We immediately contacted HBO. We got in touch with Dustin Hoffman. We contacted producer Michael Mann. And HBO assured me they were taking action to protect the horses. But I didn't believe it because the people on the set kept calling me, and I was certain another horse would die if we couldn't stop the filming of this show. And I was also sure if I could get a media outlet to write about it, it would put pressure on HBO and they might do something. So I spent a long day and night on the phone trying to get a media outlet or a reporter or an editor to care. And finally, after dozens of calls, the Washington Post and Associated Press both listened. And just the next day after I made all those phone calls, as the reporters began to ask questions, another horse did die. The Washington Post wrote a scathing article, and the media around this issue just exploded. Within 24 hours, HBO couldn't take the pressure, it cut its losses, and it canceled the show entirely.
It did, and that news really sent a shockwave through Hollywood, didn't it, Kathy?
Yeah, it really did. It also led to a lawsuit against the show's producers and an even stronger global outcry when whistleblowers revealed that 3 horses died and many others were injured during the filming of the very first Hobbit movie. I heard from a dozen people on the set of Luck, but even more contacted us to talk about The Hobbit and then about other films. It was truly unprecedented. Over the course of a couple of months, I had more than 30 calls and emails from more than 30 people. So while the film and television industries may have come a long way since the horse tripping and the frequent deaths of Westerns that were filmed during the 50s, HBO's Luck and The Hobbit show just how far they still have to go. So that's why we continue to push film companies to use CGI or computer-generated images and state-of-the-art animatronics rather than unwilling animal performers, just as AMC has recently done with those Amazingly Lifelike Tiger who will be appearing in the next season of The Walking Dead. And we were so happy about that, we awarded the show's producers an Innovation in Television Award. Our staff are in touch every week with producers and directors who are increasingly turning away from live animals, as they did in 2 movies you may have seen, Noah and The Revenant, and they're using technology instead.
Yeah, they are. By the way, everybody, please, if you have any questions, anything at all, you can press 0 on your phone, and then you'll come right back into the call, but you'll leave your question with somebody, and we will get to it. Tonight's town hall obviously is focused almost entirely on PETA's work for horses, and one campaign that I know many of our members care about deeply is getting horses off the streets, the ones that pull carriages full of tourists, no matter how hot it is or how cold it is or how slippy the streets are, how dangerous the traffic. And they are surrounded by traffic. When you think where a horse's nose is breathing in the exhaust fumes from tailpipes all day long. And they work extremely long hours because the people who own them are just downright greedy. It's no surprise that many of these horses have collapsed in the streets or died in accidents with the vehicles that just rush by them and sometimes try to cut them off. It's a miserable life to be in blinkers and blinders all day long. We do continue to see, slowly, but we see more cities move to protect horses by pulling these cruel tourist attractions from their streets. We've seen that in recent years in many cities and municipalities in the U.S., from Key West to Salt Lake City, and they have taken action to ban horse-drawn carriages. We are still pushing for the use of cruelty-free, environmentally conscious carriages to replace horse-drawn carriages in New York City. And as you probably know, we did have a bill, wonderful bill, that would have finally taken horses off New York streets, and it still remains a distant possibility that due to pressure from us, we will succeed. But what happened last time is that the very, very powerful labor groups stepped in, people like the the union for the carriage horses, which are tied to the union for the police, and so on. And we came to political gridlock at City Hall. We couldn't get that bill through. And that was the closest we'd come. That said, the movement to ban horse-drawn carriages is now gaining new strengths in many cities outside the U.S., too. And some of you may recall PETA India's investigation into the filthy, unlicensed, decrepit stables where horses are denied adequate rest, even food and water, before the rail-thin horses, are forced to haul tourists through the hectic streets of Mumbai in India. We investigated that, and during the investigation, we found many horses fitted with spiked bits that caused their mouths to bleed when the callous drivers mercilessly whip them to go faster. They pull the reins on them, and those little spikes go into their mouths and cause them to bleed. Last June, thanks to the work of PETA India, the Bombay High Court gave us a ruling that Victorias, which is what these horse-drawn carriages are known in Mumbai, Victorias must be phased out within a year. Well, you know where we are now. We're August, a year away and 2 months. So what happened was that decision was temporarily stayed by the Indian Supreme Court so that ostensibly they could come up with a plan for the rehabilitation of the horses. And, of course, we're all involved there. We're ready. But also a rehabilitation plan for the carriage owners and the drivers of these vehicles. It's a bit of a fiasco, but we just had 2 more raids and confiscated more horses from the Victoria people. And we are confident that the ban that we worked so hard in India to secure will soon mean severely neglected horses will no longer be pulling tourists around outside Mumbai's famous Gateway of India and the Taj Mahal Hotel. They'll be gone, gone, gone.
We do hope so. Thank you, Ingrid. And before we bring Kathy back to talk about PETA's latest thoroughbred rescue, a brief reminder again that you can press 0 to ask a question about our work for horses and all animals. And please, I do hope you'll consider pressing 7 and make a much-needed donation to support the work that we've discussed this evening. Kathy.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, I wanted to mention that just last week, Steve Asmussen, who was the notorious trainer at the center of our 2014 horse racing investigation, was, believe it or not, shamefully inducted into the Horse Racing Hall of Fame just 9 months after he was slapped with a $10,000 fine by the New York State Gaming Commission. But nearly every story about his induction mentioned PETA's investigation, and one of the articles talked about the rescue of a 7-year-old horse named Charlie's Quest. At the start of tonight's town hall, Ingrid told you about the rescue of Valediction, who was one of 2 horses whom Asmussen's assistant trainer referred to as a rat, a horse who loses races. Charlie's Quest was the other rat that the trainer was talking about. Charlie's Quest was claimed from a trainer by Asmussen in July of 2013, and that same month a track veterinarian found him to be unsound and unfit to race, and he was then transferred to another trainer and raced at a cheaper track. And since then, since the end of our investigation, we followed Charlie's Quest because we were really worried that he may suffer from the same kind of deadly breakdown that's responsible for the deaths of more than 24 horses every week. In 2015, we found that he had been raced 4 times in just 30 days, and that led us to ask West Virginia officials to step in and make sure that he was okay. But when he finished 7th out of 8 races in June, and then in July he came in dead last, we began taking steps to rescue him. Charlie's Quest has changed hands 7 times in 7 years. But today his racing days are over, thanks to his retirement to a wonderful farm operated by a PETA supporter. An initial exam by a veterinarian has revealed that his rescue probably came just in time. He's only 7 years old, but he's unsound in both his front and back legs. He appears to be suffering from an old ligament tear in the same ankle that was injected with medication when he was in Asmussen's barn. And while he continues to be evaluated and treated for the many serious and chronic injuries he's suffered through the years, we're really pleased that he'll soon be able to roam in a large pasture and live in peace with 2 other horses. And soon you'll be able to find some great pictures of Charlie's quest in his new home when you go to PETA.org/horses.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And before we move on to your questions now for Ingrid and Kathy, please remember that you can press 7 to give throughout the end of tonight's call, or indeed donate directly at any time online by going to our website, PETA.org/horses. And now I believe we are ready for our first question of the night. Morty in Pasadena has been waiting patiently and has a follow-up question to Steve Asmussen. Morty, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Morty.
Yeah, how you doing?
Go for it, Morty. Yeah, good, thank you. What's your question for Ingrid or Kathy?
Well, when I called and spoke to Ashley, I was the one to call up, and Kathy probably knew it already, but the fact that Asmussen was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I thought that was almost like a slap in the face of the PETA. I think that they almost did it like on purpose, to kind of get back at PETA for the investigation. But Scott Biasi, the assistant trainer, is still working, and it's just pathetic. But my comment is, and I've been involved in horse racing my whole life in various forms, but and I've been a supporter of PETA for many, many years and support all their work. But I guess one of the things would be great if you guys could try to push the racing associations to not just rule off the trainer, but rule off the owners. If they ruled off the owners, then the trainers couldn't just let their assistants train the horses while they're ruled off for 30 days or 60 days or 6 months or whatever. And if they rule off the owners, then the owners would start, hiring trainers that don't use illegal drugs, and I think that would be the best way to clean up the game in that regard. My other comment to Ashley was the fact it would be great if CNN, maybe you guys could get CNN to do one of their documentaries the way they did on Blackfish about horse racing, and have it be from CNN, and obviously maybe have PETA as part of it, but not have PETA be the main thing, because I said to Ashley, unfortunately, PETA, a lot of people just turn off when they hear PETA. They just think you guys are too aggressive, and believe me, not me. I'm all for aggression. But anyway,
thanks for those comments. I mean, I really appreciate that. I think you're right. I think that the owners are implicated in this. The owners come in 2 sorts: the kind who are very aware of what's going on, and the kind who are unaware but should be aware. And extending some of the punishment and the fines to the owners is a very good idea. Yes.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks, Morty, for your question and your comment. We are now going to go to a question that was given to us by one of our members who was online. Mark from San Diego says, I recently read on PETA's blog about, I think, 8 or 9 horses dying at the Del Mar racetrack in California. What is PETA doing about these deaths?
That's a good question. We've been involved for several years in what's going on in San Diego, and because of those breakdowns, we have done a number of things. The first year that the deaths spiked, we called for release of the records, and I think it's so important to remember that the research that shows that most horses break down on the tracks because they have an injury, a pre-existing injury, comes right out of California. It comes from the necropsies that are required on racehorses in California. So we want the state of California to put those 2 things together and to realize that most of these horses who are breaking down probably were being given a cocktail of drugs that forced them to run when they shouldn't have been running. So we initially have called for the release of the records. We have filed complaints with law enforcement and with the district attorney. We've asked to meet with officials at the track. Right now they're resisting, but I think what's important is that this is getting so much attention, and I think it's also important to realize that these numbers are not, sadly, that unusual. 9 horses at least have died at the Saratoga racetrack in New York this year. What's different now is that people are noticing it and they're objecting to it. So with enough pressure from the public, and we'll certainly keep pressing, we'll get them to take action on that.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Next, we have another live question. David in Rolling Meadows. David, what's your question for Ingrid and Kathy?
I agree with all this about the carriage horses and things like that. But what are you going to do with the horses if they're not employed in the carriage trade? I mean, it takes a lot of money to take care of a horse, and what are the owners going to do? I mean, I agree with that there should be more humane treatment to them, but I don't know what to do. Well, what are we going to do with the horses?
I can take that if you like, because in both, say, the Victorias in Mumbai and in New York, assurances have been given that animal people will rally, and come hell or high water, we will find places. We've already had people like Gillian Michaels, the TV personality. She says she has a place for one or two. We've got all these people lined up who will gladly provide a forever home for these horses. And we're doing the same with PETA India. We've got pledges of people who have good places where we can guarantee they won't end up at the butchers. In New York, you've heard a lot of the carriage horse people inventing excuses that, oh, well, the horses would die if they were off the streets. I wouldn't listen to it for a second, because we, for example, just rescued, with the help of a sheriff in the South, I think it was over 135 pigs. Now, where do you put 135 pigs? We will find a place for them that's decent. Here, they're scattered throughout the United States. In the case of the carriage horse owners, I find it such a disingenuous worry on their part, because they know full well most of those horses, if not all of them, end up in what as a child we used to call the knacker's yard, which is the slaughterhouse. They're going to be sold when they're no use to them and sent off to slaughter in Mexico or Canada. I mean, there is no, as you said, there are so many of them. When they break down, I mean, they don't go to some wonderful place in the countryside where they're babied and vetted. They go to the butchers, and we will not allow that to happen. And we will stop that cycle of, once they've got rid of one horse, then acquiring another and having a hideous life for that horse, and so on.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and thank you, David, for your question there. Next, we have another question from a member online, Jane in Tucson, Arizona. What effect do you think your efforts are having on racing long-term? Ingrid, Kathy, who wants to take this one?
I can take this question. Well, we know exactly what's going on and what's happening long-term, and that is basically that the horse racing industry is in big trouble. We know from a report commissioned by the Jockey Club in 2011, a massive $1 million report on the state of horse racing, that people are not coming to the sport. New people are not coming. The people who go to races and who gamble on them, it's an aging population, and when that population is gone, they haven't replaced it with younger people. And they know that the number one concern of people about horse racing today is what the animal rights people are saying, that it's unsafe for horses. And as Ingrid has mentioned, we've seen the full birth rate drop since 2008 by half. There are now 25,000 thoroughbred foals born a year. 8 years ago, it was 50,000. We know that subsidies are dropping, and these are the money that's made from the slot machines on the racetrack is a life support system for horse racing. But in some states, officials are saying no more of this money to go to racing. It's going to go to the schools and the other issues that our state has trouble with. And when those subsidies drop, racing is not going to be able to support itself, and tracks are closing all across the country. I think the long-term prediction for racing is that it's not here forever. But, of course, we've got to do what we can in the meantime to help the horses who are still being used.
Indeed we do. Thanks, Kathy, for that. We have another live caller on the line, Judy in Florida. What's your question, Judy?
Yes, I just was worried about the long term of horse racing and dog racing and why it cannot be phased out within the next few years, maybe 5 years.
Oh, we'd love that. Ingrid, would you like to take...
I think...
Sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. I was just about to say, I think dog racing is really on its last legs, which is a terrible phrase to use, I think. But we've seen yet another state end dog racing, and I don't think, it is barely viable, barely alive right now, and it won't be much longer. I think with horse racing, we're a little bit farther out on it. it's not the same kind of situation. It still has a small fan base, and it still gains some attention from television stations who show the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown races. They've seen falling audiences, and as those audiences fall, they'll lose interest in it too, but we probably have a little bit longer than 5 years to go, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Kathy. We had another online question from our member Sharon from Dearborn, Michigan. Sharon said, I saw something on the local NBC station with advice from PETA on taking care of animals during the storms we had earlier in the week. And then I heard you, Ingrid, mention that you're helping animals during the Louisiana flooding, not to mention the fires out in California. I was wondering if there was any advice you can give on helping animals before people face disasters like the ones we had this week. Ingrid, what do you have to say?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to rush to the scene when a disaster has already occurred, which is what, of course, all hands on deck you have to do. And then it's too late to save many of the animals because no one was home when the water rose or the fire came through or so on. And we are always praising and helping fire departments and first responders and encouraging them to do the right thing, not only by humans who are in trouble, but by all the animals. Livestock in those fires in California are in particular trouble because you can throw some belongings into a car and flee, but it's a bit hard to throw some horses, goats, pigs, or any other animals into the car when you're being told evacuate now. So before the fact, we work very hard with rescue agencies, fire and rescue, with the police, the sheriff's department, emergency response, you name it, to pretty much beg them to not leave family members behind who happen not to be human. And that is having impact. As I mentioned earlier, you're seeing in this new Louisiana situation an interest in making sure people leave with their animals and not leave them behind. We were part of the door-to-door group, in Kentucky during Katrina, and we're part of the group doing that now in Louisiana. But many, many other things. If there is advance warning and we know that a major storm or a flood or the beginnings of a fire are coming, then we have a specific department that actually puts out advisories to all radios, television stations, everything we can in that state or that county that says, please be prepared. And this means for everyone, because you never know when something's going to happen. You remember 9/11, who expected that? And we then had to race up to New York and try to help all those animals who were locked in apartment complexes, and no one would let anybody in, and we had to bribe doormen to let us in to get animals out. So beforehand, we always say, I have these advisories, and among them, they say, just as you know your way out, know the way out for your animals. Always carry an emergency rescue kit in your car. It can be as simple as a laundry basket with a top or a cardboard cat carrier. Always carry inside it a flexible leash, a couple of cans of pop-top food, a bowl and some water so that you could be ready to help an animal in danger wherever it happens. Have evacuation plans for your animals. Have someone, if you're out of town, know that you have animals and know that you have entrusted their care to them. Make sure they have a key or a way to get in to get the animals out. If you're in an area and you have livestock, be sure your trailer is in good enough condition to move at a few hours' notice, not has a flat tire or something, and you're going to get around to fixing it. So we always say put emergency numbers on your animal's collars. And if push comes to shove, get someone to open those rabbit hutch doors, open those kennel doors, open anything in an animal holding facility so that the animals have a chance not to just sit there and drown or burn to death or whatever it is, but to run, because we need to make sure they can get out. But we have lots of tips. Go to PETA.org, lots of tips on the website.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Right, I think we have time for a final question. Jill from Aiken, South Carolina, wrote in and said, what do you think about the use of Lasix? A lot of people in racing say it's kind. Kathy, what's wrong with Lasix?
Yeah, Lasix is a very powerful diuretic, and it's given to horses because sometimes they bleed from the nostrils or from their lungs after they are raced. And a lot of people say for that reason it helps to stop the bleeding and it's kind. Well, in fact, the question we have to ask is, why are horses bleeding? And that's because they're overworked. They're run too far, too fast. And that's what causes the problem in the first place. Lasix is illegal in every racing jurisdiction in the world except for the United States. But the real reason people like it is that it is a diuretic, and any other drugs that the horse has will be, excuse my term, urinated out along with their urine, and it's a good masker for drugs. So we're very much opposed to it. It's very controversial, but we're opposed to it.
Thank you, Kathy. So, Ingrid, I think we're about done here.
Well, all right then. I don't know where an hour goes, but thank you for all the questions that you have sent in or that we have got to. And as Ben mentioned at the start of the call, if we didn't have time to get to your question, please know we will get in touch with you about it in the next few days. So your question will not languish. If you still want to ask a question, please just stay on the line at the end of the call, which is coming up in a second. And as always, we always welcome any suggestions you have for future town hall topics. We do a lot of work, a lot of it you won't hear about unless you ask, so please do. And while much of the vital work we've discussed tonight has been about winning reforms that can change the lives of potentially hundreds of thousands of horses, it is important to remember that behind every campaign, whether it's about getting horse-drawn carriages off crowded city streets, or it's about ending the illegal use of pain masking and performance-enhancing drugs by the racing industry, it's our commitment to see that every horse has a chance to experience the same freedom from all this abusive behavior and negligence that the dear horses Sebastian, Coming Home, Valediction, and then just last week Charlie's Quest are all now enjoying. So thank you again, everyone, for your compassion, and thank you very much for your support of our work for horses and for all animals. And as I always say, because it's true, we really couldn't do any of this without you.
Thank you, guys. This concludes tonight's PETA Town Hall. I do hope you'll join us on October 19th for our next Town Hall meeting, where we will be discussing our work to get animals out of laboratories and cruel training exercises. Please do stay on the line now if you would like to leave us a voice message about tonight's call, or if you have any suggestions for future calls. Thank you so much for joining us, and do have a pleasant evening.